everybody. I am Kate Johnson with Briargate Farm. We are here on 5 acres. We've been here for about 16 years. We are going to talk about dairy goats today, but when we moved to this farm 16 years ago, we were all about horses. So I had 2 young daughters at the time that really wanted to ride, and boarding is expensive and lessons are expensive, and I grew up doing horse stuff, so we decided to just do it ourselves. So we started with horses, and then one of my students had a goat, had a lot of goats actually, and they had babies, and they invited us over to bottle feed the baby goats. And I always say, you don't bottle feed baby goats and think you're not getting goats if you have a farm, because they're cute. So that's how it started. We just started as a 4-H project because I knew nothing about goats. This was about 13 or 14 years ago. And I liked them. I wanted to do some stuff with goats, but we didn't know anything. So we joined 4-H and learned most of what we learned initially through 4-H. And then my daughter started showing at open shows, and we learned a lot from a lot of professional breeders through that. And then we started milking the goats and eventually started making cheese, and eventually learned a whole lot about making cheese and opened a cheese making school. So that's kind of how we've morphed into the dairy goat side of things. We're down to 2 horses, and they're hopefully leaving in the spring to go live with my daughter. So we raise dairy goats, and I always say goats can have different jobs. They're bred to do different things. So dairy goats are bred specifically for their dairy production, although you could eat a dairy goat, right? The meat still tastes good. Whereas meat goats, market goats, are really raised for their meat production, but of course they still provide milk, right? And then there are fiber goats that are like cashmere and Angora goats. There are some pygmy goats that are just cute little short fat things that don't really have much of a job other than being cute, although the Nigerian dwarf is a very functional dairy goat, so not to be confused with the pygmy. And then there's some other things like fainting goats, which are actually a meat breed, but they have that funny fainting thing they do. So dairy goats, we raise Nubian dairy goats. So that's what you'll see here. We have 9 does here and 1 little wether. Yes, we do have one with a broken leg. Just I'll get that out of the way here. We have a little baby who broke her leg. Sadly, this is actually the 2nd time she's broken that leg. The first time we think it was because we had some little spools, and this I will just tell you up front, goats are very mischievous. They get into everything with little spools. They had holes on top. We put a board on it, but that board was composite wood, and it rained every day in May. And she stuck her foot through the hole. Now, we got rid of all those. We don't know how she broke it the 2nd time. She's had all these tests done, no metabolic bone disease, but at any rate, there she is in a cast again. So she's a very sweet little goat, but she's been an expensive one. That doesn't happen very often. Goats are usually not that accident prone. At any rate, anybody can tell me what breed these are? Nubians, yes. How do you know? Floppy ears, right? The whole reason I got Nubians was I liked the floppy ears. I didn't know anything about Nubians other than they had long floppy ears. We actually started out breeding mini Nubians. So I know we have some Nigerian dwarf people here. That's a miniature breed of dairy goat. And in the dairy goat world, there are, I believe they're up to now 9 formal breeds that are recognized by the American Dairy Goat Association. Then there are a lot of crossbreeds too. And so the Nigerian dwarf is the only miniature dairy goat breed. And because my kids were little when we started, we thought, well, let's raise little goats. But I like the floppy ears, and Nigerian dwarfs have little erect ears. So if you cross a Nubian or any full-size breed with a Nigerian dwarf, you get a mini of that breed. In Nubians, it takes 5 generations till they're registered, purebred mini Nubians. Not by the American Dairy Goat Association, but by the Miniature Dairy Goat Association. So that's what we started with. We got a small Nubian and bred her to a Nigerian dwarf. This one, where is she? Oh, she's the one that isn't here right now. She looks like her mother, but she's not here right now. Anyhow, she was a little Nubian. We bred many Nubians for a number of years. Then my daughter wanted to show at these open shows, and we switched to full Nubians because you couldn't show the crossbreeds. At any rate, these are Nubians, and I just want to make sure that I'm covering everything that I said I was going to cover today. So I'm going to kind of look through my notes a little bit. But the full-size breeds, which Nubians are going to, of course, produce more milk, right, than the little breeds. But they also take up a little more space. They eat a lot more. And so the miniature breeds are really good for small backyard farms. Now, I know, Howard, you have milked your little Nigerians. Are they pretty milkable? Can you do it by hand? Yeah, so the Nigerian dwarf was, until this last breed, the Golden Guernsey, was the last breed to be recognized by the American Dairy Goat Association. And for a while, it was hard to find Nigerians that had a really milkable udder. You know, they're little, and so, you know, they have little udders, you know, and little teats. And so one of the reasons we did mini Nubians was by bringing in that bigger breed, we would get more milkable udders. The Nigerians now have really come a long way, and some of them are quite milkable by hand. A lot of people with Nigerians milk with machines, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of each. But there's two things that are really great about Nubians and Nigerian dwarfs if you want to make cheese. And that is that they have very high butterfat content and very sweet, mild tasting milk. At the end, I'm actually going to have you taste some Nubian milk. Because how many of you have tasted fresh milk, goat milk from the farm? Yeah, a few of you have. All right. So I have some just for those of you who are new to dairy goat milk. At any rate, the Nubians do have this sweet, mild milk. They don't produce as much milk as some breeds. There are 4 Swiss breeds of dairy goats, those white goats that you see a lot that have the big erect ears. Those are probably the biggest producers, the Saanens. And then there are Toggenburgs, Oberhaslis, and what's the other one I'm missing? Saanen, Toggenburg, Oberhasli, and Alpines. Those are the big Swiss breeds, and they are the most prolific milkers. They're going to produce the most milk for the longest period of time. Their milk's going to be lower in butterfat and lower in protein. And this little chart that you're welcome to take kind of breaks down the amount of milk per year that you'll get per doe, what their average butterfat and their average protein is. A lot of those Swiss breeds also, people tend to think of that milk as tasting a little goatier. You know, it has that little maybe gamier taste to it sometimes. And then there are a couple other breeds. The La Mancha. Anybody ever seen a La Mancha goat? What's their characteristic? Yeah, they have no ears. They do have ears.
It looks like they all got in an accident.
Exactly. Yeah, they have they don't have very much external ear. They're still fully functioning ears that work, and there are different ones. There's some that have a bigger ear, a little more of an ear than others. They are a very mild-mannered, very sweet goat that's pretty big. So they are actually a really nice in between these two. So I told you we are going to have a lot of air traffic. And then this newest one I don't know much about. The Golden Guernsey is a new breed that's in the process of being sanctioned by the American Dairy Goat Association. It's an endangered, pretty rare breed. So I haven't met any of them yet, but I did do a little research just to pull up. They also have, you know, kind of like the Swiss breeds, a little bit lower butterfat and protein. So the Nubians, I guess their claim to fame is they're, in my opinion, the most beautiful of the breeds and the cutest because they have those long ears. They have high butterfat, they have sweet milk, but they have a little bit of a temperament thing that gives them a bad rap sometimes. Sometimes they're nicknamed the needy, noisy Nubians. They can be a little stubborn, a little strong-willed, a little noisier than some of the other breeds. We always laugh at shows because a class of baby Nubians is really loud compared to all the other breeds. But temperament is in part genetic. And so we've been breeding for the last 12 years to get good temperament in our Nubians. And so we've got some pretty darn easy to handle, pretty sweet and relatively quiet girls here, which we really like. So we're going to do some milking because I know that's the main reason we're here.
One question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you pen full-size goats with dwarf goats, or maybe
Yeah, so the question was, could you house or pen full-size goats with the miniature breeds? And yeah, you can. And in fact, we used to raise Nigerian dwarfs here as well. So there's a few challenges there. Probably the biggest challenge of cohabitating with the big breeds and the little breeds is really nutritional needs. So your little Nigerians get pretty darn fat when they're living with a bunch of full-size breeds if they're all competing for food, at the same time and they're eating the same amount. And then temperamentally, and this is true, big, little, different breed, same breed, just not all temperaments mix and match well, right? So the Nigerians are a little bit littler, and if you have really pushy big girls, they could push those girls around. I never found that to be a problem. My Nigerians could hold their ground just fine around the big girls, but I think that, those are the two things you might consider. But a lot of people do that. And it may just be that you do some separation during feed time. We even have to do that here because we have some does that are easier keepers. They just hold their weight better than others, and we have to do some separating at feeding time. Yeah. Yeah, Isabel.
Can you talk briefly about a guard animal, a dog versus a donkey versus a gun?
Yes, well, it is on my list, but we might as well talk about it now. She wanted to know about guard animals for goats. And you might see back there we have a llama. So we do use a guardian llama as our guard. We have tried a dog in the past. Dog didn't work out real well for us with our style of how we take care of the animals. Basically, we shut our animals in at night, and the dog was out at night barking all night, of course, keeping us awake. And then during the day, the dog was in sleeping because it had been barking all night while the goats were out. And that didn't really work for us too well. Our goats also never really adjusted to the dog. They were always scared of them. Dogs are a natural predator. Goats are prey animals. And so it's not that it doesn't ever work. There's a lot of people who raise goats and have guardian dogs, but it didn't work for us. And so we had the llama already, and we just decided the llama was fine. So llamas are really good guard animals in that they're quiet. And they do have different temperaments. Some are more aggressive than others and might not be as pleasant for you to be around. Our llama is very mellow and very sweet and easy to be around people, but he's also very protective of the goats. Now, the llama is not trained to guard. That is just a natural instinct. About 75 or 80% of llamas will just take on this guarding trait. They bond with whatever they're living with, especially if they're in single. If you have two llamas, not so much. We actually got a second llama for a while, and Seeger, our llama, had been with his goats for years. And the second llama came and he totally ignored the goats. And he was all about the other llama. And we're like, all right, the other llama's gotta go. So it can work in some situations. If you had a really big herd where they were in different places, that might work. Now, I have no experience with miniature donkeys or donkeys, but I do hear that they can be guards. They're a little too similar to horses, and we're trying to get out of horses to want to try that experiment. Alpacas, not guards. Alpacas typically need to be guarded. So although alpacas and llamas often look somewhat interchangeable, most alpacas are not guard animals, but llamas typically are. All right, so, yes?
What qualifies a goat as a good dairy goat? Is it primarily sheer volume of production or flavor?
Oh, that's great question. So the question was, what makes a good dairy goat, right? What is it about them that you would say, this is a good dairy goat? And I would say, it's funny because we do show our goats, not so much anymore, but unlike some of the horse shows where the look of the horse has nothing to do with how good of a riding horse it's going to be, with dairy goat shows, a lot of what they're looking for in terms of conformation does equate to what makes a good dairy goat. So on the ADGA scorecard, about 30% of the score is going to go to the mammary system. So obviously milk production is a huge part of being a dairy goat. But it's not just like how does the milk taste. It is about production, like is this goat going to produce a lot of milk over a long period of time? And is the udder built in such a way that it can do this year after year after year, right? So we're looking for strong attachments, the rear udder attachment that holds the udder up in the back, and I'll point that out when we get a doe out. You want that to be strong so that that udder stays up high and firm. We don't want udders dragging on the ground by year 5 or 6, right? And then the teat placement and the size makes a difference. If your teats are way out here, first of all, it's going to be hard for babies to find the teat because there's the leg in the way, so not real good moms. It's hard for you as a milker. So having plumb teats that are, pointing down and more in the center is really important. Having a strong ligament that divides the two halves is important. But beyond the mammary system, only 30% goes to that, is the overall bone structure of the goat. Because dairy goats are seasonal breeders. They have babies every year and then they have their milk. Some breeds might go more than one milking season. Some of those Swiss breeds, especially like the Alpines, you might get 2 milking seasons out of one breeding, but in general, goats are seasonal. And so that means every year, if you want milk, you're breeding them. That's a lot of stress on, a body, right? If those women here who have had babies think, my God, having babies every year for 10 years would be a lot of stress, right? So we want to make sure that that doe is built in such a way that she can handle that, right? So having strong, straight legs, having a really good top line, that would be her back muscles and bone structure, being wide enough to carry babies, right? If you're really narrow in here, you're going to have a lot of trouble having babies in there and getting them out. So a lot of the conformation and structural things that we're looking for in our beauty contest called the Dairy Goat Show really is very functional in the long run. Yeah, so does that pretty much sum? Yeah. All right. All right. Any other just burning questions about anything I've covered so far before we get a doe out to milk? Yeah.
Would you mind just going through the schedule of breeding, milking, you dry them off?
Yeah, so he wants to know the schedule of breeding, milking, dry off, and I'm gonna hold that question until we get done with the milking, only because they kind of want to be milked now, and we only are gonna milk 2.5. Yeah, I know you're thinking, how do you milk a half a goat? I have one doe that is only producing on one side. We'll talk about that when we get to her. So any of you who want to milk today are more than welcome to. I'm going to teach you, so don't worry. You can use a little hand sanitizer. If you would like to milk, you can go ahead and get in the queue. So what I'm going to do is get the does out. They may be a little confused because this is my milk house, but it's a little hard for us to film in there and everybody to see. So we're going to go outside, but they've done this before. This is our milk stand. You can see they get fed here, so they're very excited to come out here and be milked. Not only are they getting to eat, they also get all that pressure relieved from their udder, right? This is called the stanchion, and when the goat gets in here, I can close this so she can't pull her head back. It won't squeeze her or hurt her or anything. Our goats are getting fed a combination of, we do feed a conventional feed. I know some of you are learning about growing grains, and if we had the property for it, we actually are getting ready to reclaim that whole arena and turn it into a garden. But this is what we're feeding now, primarily. We have tried organic feeds. We do not raise our goats organic because a couple of reasons. One is they hated the organic grain. It's a lot of seeds, and even if I introduced that as their first grain, I just couldn't get them to thrive on it. They just didn't like it. Some people are doing fine with it, but my goats, they are such divas. They were like, yeah, no, we're not eating that. And when they're producing milk, they need a ton of calories. And so not only to maintain their own body, but to produce all that milk too. So you got to make sure they're going to eat whatever it is you're offering them because they need a lot of calories. The other thing with going organic is then you have to get organic hay. And I'm going to just show you a couple of hay options. Probably you all are farmers and you know some of this. This is grass hay and this is alfalfa. If you have a dairy doe in milk and she needs all those extra calories, alfalfa is really your better bet because it's higher in protein and sugars and so on. So if you're trying to just get organic hay, it's a little hard in this area to find good quality certified organic hay. So if you're really working hard to get organic, you might be bypassing some really nice hay that would be better for them nutritionally than some of the stuff that's out there called organic. So that's a problem with organic. Third thing is, if you're trying to be certified organic in livestock, you cannot treat with antibiotics on your property at all, ever. So that means if your doe gets sick or she gets a little subclinical mastitis, which we'll talk about here, you're going to have to send her off somewhere if you want to treat her the way she should be treated, which is antibiotics. For the most part, natural remedies might be good for prevention of a lot of things, and we're going to talk a lot about preventing it in the first place. But once you got it, you really want to get rid of it. So all of those things combined for us made it really problematic to try to be organic. Now, does that mean we're using antibiotics for growth? No, we only treat with antibiotics when we absolutely have to. And then we're not going to give anybody that milk, right? There is a withdrawal time for any medication. We always double our withdrawal time before we'll start using the milk again. And then we're trying to feed us. I get most of my hay from a farmer across the street who doesn't spray, but it's not certified organic. So I couldn't be called certified organic. But some of my alfalfa, to get really good alfalfa, I may not be able to be quite that picky. So anyhow, that's that. I just wanted to mention that since we are going to get them out. We do supplement with some alfalfa pellets as well. Right now, I don't have a ton of alfalfa hay. They're getting a lot of grass hay, so we're going to supplement a little bit. But we'll get this all set up so that they are ready to come out. Now, you'll notice everybody's looking very eagerly here at the milk stand. If I open the gate, I will have 7 goats up on the milk stand. I only want 1. So what I always do is take a little bit of the feed and I spread it out on the fence for everybody else. And that way, they kind of know their order, usually. I'll give you babies a little bit. So these 3 are siblings. They were triplets, and they're keeping her company while she has to be away from the herd. So the way I kind of do it, get everybody busy. And then the first one that I want will come out. She's like, wait, don't we go in there?
Is she always the first one out?
Yep, she is. They are very hierarchical. And so this is Phoebe, and everybody's decided this year she'll be first. I should say, so the question was, is she always the first one out? Right now she is. Their hierarchical nature moves around as you have different animals come in, so she wasn't always first. But her competition is on her way out. She's kind of retiring and getting older. And so now she seems to be first. So this is Phoebe. She's what we call a second freshener. That means she's had babies twice. We call it freshening when they come into their milk, which they only do after they have babies, right? So I'm going to give a quick demonstration, and then while she's eating, anyone that wants to come and try it is welcome to. So for preparation, I just use baby wipes. You can buy, expensive dairy wipes. You can make your own cleaner, but I find it easiest just to use baby wipes. And what I'm basically doing here is just getting the dirt off and the loose hair. I'm actually going to pasteurize this milk, and we're going to talk about that whole thing later. So I am going to talk about it, all right? First thing we want to do is just take the first few squirts of milk into a container because we're going to discard this. This is where most of the bad germs are going to be, is in that first few squirts. Also, by putting it in a little container, I can just check to make sure there's no clots or blood or anything like that. Usually my barn cat comes and drinks that. Now I'm going to show you a mastitis test. This is something we don't do every time we milk, but every couple weeks I will check for mastitis, because even if the goat's not showing any symptoms whatsoever, they could have a case of what's called subclinical mastitis. And that is where they've got some of this bad bacteria growing, and it just hasn't made them sick yet. We take this little, it's called the California mastitis test, and this is the concentrate they give you mixed up with liquid, and you put it into the milk, swirl that around, and the milk should just stay the consistency of milk, all right? If that's the case, everything's fine. If she had some mastitis, this milk would turn kind of gel-like, and the more quickly it gels, the further along the mastitis is. And so we want to always check for that periodically so we can catch it early in case she were to develop it. I only have one doe that is susceptible, and she's the one that's only got half an udder right now because she did get a little mastitis this year. This is her last year. She's going to retire soon. But she's from a completely different line than all my other does. And I haven't continued her line because of this. She also temperamentally, she's really nice, but I don't like her daughters. They're a little high strung. All right, so when we go to milk, just a couple of terminologies here. There's only one udder, okay, but there's two teats, and there's a suspensory ligament in the middle that divides those up so that they're completely separate. And the teats are full of milk right now, and I'm not going to pull on the teats. What I'm going to basically do is squeeze the top and then squeeze the milk out. So if you see, it's more of a close off the top, squeeze that milk out. So it's not so much a pulling action as it is just gently kind of massaging. Somebody described it once as a pastry bag, right? And you're trying to squeeze that frosting out. And you'll see that she's fairly plumb, and so it's not too hard to hit the pan. I like this pan because it's nice and wide, and it's short, so it works well with small goats. All right, so that's how milking works. I'm going to let anybody try it that wants to. We're going to just filter the milk over here. We'll dump it off every now and then so that in case she kicks the pan, we won't lose too much. All right, so anybody that wants to come, just do a little hand sanitizer. Come on over here. Yep, sit right down there, give it a try. My goats are very used to strangers doing this to them. The moms are happy to be up here. They just jab on them and knock them off their feet. Yeah, totally. So they think no matter how hard you are pulling, you are gentler than their babies, for sure. Your hands don't have teeth. I mean, all kinds of good stuff here. Yeah, so you can see she's pretty, you're doing good. Have you ever done this before?
No, first time.
All right.
Massage therapist, though.
Oh, well, there you go. Good, strong hands, massage therapist, yes. That's a good profession to have, to be a milk person. Good. Yeah, very easy. And then we'll just take this and pour it through here. We'll talk about that in a sec. All right, anybody else want to give it a try? How you doing there, Phoebe? We just keep her in food. She's happy. You can overfeed them, but I know we'll get through this fast enough. She's acclimated to a lot of grain because she's in milk. So Phoebe had triplets her first year, and when they have that many babies, they typically produce more milk. So she was a huge producer last year. She only had twins this year, and she's, I would say, still probably my biggest producer. If I was milking her twice a day, we would be getting probably a gallon a day from her. At this late in the season, that's pretty good. She was producing a little more than that earlier in the season. I'm only milking once a day, and milk is a supply and demand thing, right? So the more you milk them, the more they produce. The less you milk them, the less they produce. So if you want maximum production, you're gonna milk them twice a day. if you are kind of getting tired of milking, like I get by the end of the season, then you might go down to once a day so that when you're ready to dry them off, it'll be easier. And I will answer that whole question when we get there. All right, she's starting to get a little impatient now because she's getting full. So I'll finish her up. Don't worry, if you wanted to milk, I have another one coming. But when they start getting jumpy, oh, are you full and now you want to be done? Yeah. There's still food there, girlie. So when she starts getting jumpy like this, I milk one-handed because you can see I can move this around a little bit. Usually she's a lot more patient than this, but I think being outside too, this is just a weird setting. Look at, you got food here. Do you see that? Yeah, you're okay. You're okay. All right, if we don't get her all the way milked out, that's okay. You're not sticking up with my claim that we've been breeding for temperament. She says, well, I want them to see how Nubians really are. Yeah, so what will happen is these teats won't be filling up anymore. And also, she'll still have an udder, but it'll be much smaller. Oh, Phoebe, you are just being a pill. One of the things that I like about, now her teats to me are almost too small. Like they're pretty milkable. They'll get bigger the more time she has babies. And they're better this year than they were last year. But she almost didn't make my final cut because the size of her teats is just a little smaller than I like. But she actually is really easy to handle, and she's a big producer, and she's a really good mom. So I've kept her in my lineup. But when she behaves like that, she might find herself on the sale block. It's what?
They don't look small by
Exactly, right? Well, wait till you see the next one who has ginormous, and the next one is almost like they're almost too big. So something that's a little happy medium is probably better, but she's really easy to milk. All right, so she's still got a little bit more in here, but we're gonna call that good. So when we finish milking, so you can see how I'm just having trouble getting much more out. She's still got a little in there, but since I'm getting to the end of milking season, I don't mind too much if I leave a little, because then that means she'll just produce a little less the next day. All right, when we're done milking though, we've just opened up this orifice, right? And now we're gonna put them back in the barnyard where there's poop. So we wanna make sure we close it up as good as we can and put a little disinfectant spray in there. So this is called Fight Back. It's a cold spray, and so I like this as opposed to a teat dip. A lot of people use a teat dip, nothing wrong with this. Usually it's an iodine dip or another solution, and you just dip the teat. The thing is, the cold nature of this helps to close that orifice. So I feel like it's a little bit better, and it shoots a little disinfectant right up in there. And that's gonna be the cleaning of the udder, cleaning your hands, keeping your pens as clean as you can, and then this is the most important thing. Disinfecting at the end is how you're gonna prevent mastitis. So really important. All right, now you're just standing there nicely, huh? All right, so we'll see if she'll go back and we'll bring the next doe. Are you done? All right, you weren't 100% well behaved, but we still like you. All right, so we'll see if the next one is ready. Good. She's like, what? All right, so this is Salsa, and she is also a second freshener, although she's a year younger than Phoebe, because she was She was born in February, I think, maybe March, and so we bred her first year. I'll talk about that a little bit more when we're not rushing to get through the milking. But let me just make sure she has enough to keep her busy. So you can see she has a really different udder size and shape than Phoebe. Much, much easier to milk, in my opinion. She also has bigger orifices, which makes it easier to milk because the milk comes out faster, and she also has a better temperament. Phoebe is actually super sweet, but this doe is probably the easiest to handle of all the does I've ever had. I really like her. So I'm planning to keep a baby out of her next year. But you can just see that she's got very plump, very big, and you see, especially this side, see how fast that milk comes out? Yeah, so I can, when she's at her top milk production, I can milk her out in 2 minutes. It's so fast. All right, anybody want to try her? All right, I know it's in a weird place that we're doing this, girly, but you can handle it.
Do you only hand milk?
Yeah, good question. He asked, do I only hand milk? So there's hand milking and there's milking machines. There's pros and cons of both. I'm right now only milking 3 goats. At my max, I was milking 6 this year. So 5 or 6 is kind of the cutoff where it's actually faster to hand milk because you don't have to set up the machine and then clean it all up and all of that. It's also a little easier on their udder to hand milk because the suction of a machine does tend to break down some of that mammary tissue over time. I don't own a machine either because they are very expensive to get a good quality machine. I've had some hand machines that really just don't work very good. You're good at that. Have you done that before? Oh my gosh, you're natural. Yeah, there you go. All right, anybody else want to try it? Sure. All right. Good. Oh, you'll be surprised. You know, it is something that you get a feel for it over time. Our first doe that we milked had never been milked before, and we had never milked before. It was really not a pretty scene. For about a week, we got no milk because she's kicking the bucket and we're missing the bucket. It was terrible.
It's a good point to get an experienced doe.
It is. It really is kind of nice to either get one that's experienced or at least get one who has a good temperament. She also did not have a very good temperament. She was just she was your quintessential Nubian. Very stubborn, very strong-willed. Good, see, you did it. Yeah, you totally did it. Anybody else wanting to try it before? All right, jump on in there. Don't worry. We're just going to do one more person with you. You can handle it. Yeah, so the machines, though, are nice if you have a doe that either has really small teats or really small orifices. I have a friend who I milk for him when he's out of town. He has this one son, and now they're the biggest producers. So she's probably gonna do, I don't know, a gallon of milking. Or you did it.
Smells good.
Awesome, very good. All right, anybody else wanting to do any? Yeah, all right. But she has, this sonin of his has the smallest orifices I've ever seen, and small teats. Huge udder, small teats. Takes me 20 minutes to milk her, and my hands are just aching by the end. So she's a beautiful show goat, but that is not a goat I would have in my milk house.
Would that be more likely to give mastitis then?
It could if you weren't getting her milked out properly. But otherwise, it's just a difference in just how she's built. So that's a goat that I would probably like to have a milking machine for, personally, if I were gonna have her in my milk lineup. But since I prefer not to have a milk machine, I really I'm breeding for what I call milkability. So milkability for me is 3 things. Temperament, they gotta be able to just stand there and be patient. Then the size and shape of the teat, and then the size of that orifice. And so if they have all 3 of those things, they're gonna stay in my milk lineup. And I don't really care anymore how great of a show goat they are. But the good thing about having show quality goats, as we said earlier, is all those things that make a good show goat also make a good milking goat. And if you're trying to sell babies, because remember, goat math is exponential, right? You have babies every year, and usually it's more than 1, and pretty soon you have not 2, but 4, but 8, 20, goats. And so having outlets, you did very, very well there. you know, having a place to sell them, if they are show quality, that will increase, you know, where you can sell them. All right, so you can see how she's now just not filling up. See how different the teats look? So she's also one that's really milks out nicely. Yeah, she's like, whoo, that's cold. I have had 1 or 2 does that I had to use the dip on because they never got used to that spray. And what they would do is that as you got toward the end of milking, they'd start dancing around and knocking over the milk pan because they were anticipating that cold spray. And so I did use a dip on them.
Where do you buy all your disinfectants?
So I get most of my stuff at just Murdoch's because it's close by. You can mail order the Fight Back though. In fact, I now get it from my friend who has the dairy goats because he orders cases, and then he'll sell them to me a little less than having to buy it. Interestingly, you will see there's a cow on here. Most of the products for the dairy world are geared to cows. Goats seem to be the afterthought in the dairy world. I don't know why, because they're pretty popular now. Even the mastitis test thing is geared to a cow because there's 4 chambers for 4 teats. And we only have 2. So, all right. You are very good.
Putting your products on any of your handouts or name of them,
I don't know if I put that on there or not. I don't think I wrote it down, but I will be happy to email any of that to you if you want, or you can always take pictures too, yeah, of it. So, and I do want to also just say, you know, my whole thing today is showing you how I do it, and this isn't like the only way to do it. There's a lot of different ways people do things, you know, different teat wipes, different processes, but this is what has worked well for us. And so that, you know, that's my disclaimer. Anybody that does it a little differently, they're not wrong, probably. They just have a different style than we have. Also, I will tell you a little bit about these collars. I really like these collars because they have a kind of emergency brake link. Because with dairy goats, you know, you are moving them around a lot from point A to point B. And although I know this looks like they're really trainable, this is just habit, you know, for them. They're not doing this because they're really well trained. This is just habit for them to jump in and out like this. When they're new at this, they need to be led around and they need to learn how to get on the milk stand. In fact, I always get the babies on the milk stand and feed them so that by the time they are in milk and they're a big doe, they know how to do this. Because one year I didn't do that. And it was the doe's first time on the milk stand. And, you know, she's hormonal, just had babies, has this big udder. And now you want me to jump up here? And she's like, I don't understand that. And then trying to lift, you know, a 120-pound hormonal goat onto the milk stand. We're going to let Salsa just stay out for a minute and socialize with you while we bring the last doe out here. All right, let's bring our last girl up here. And we'll talk a little bit about this mastitis thing. And in the interest of time, I'll just milk her. Where are you, Alexa? Oh, there you are. Come on. All right, so this is a good example of an older doe. She is going to be 10 this year. She has had 6 or 7 sets of babies. And if you look at her udder back here, you'll see she really only has milk on one side. So she's pretty lopsided. She developed a little bit of mastitis on that other side. This is her last year being bred. I usually retire them by 10 unless they're really just having no problems whatsoever. But she's tended to have a little bit of this subclinical mastitis a few times. She's a good mom, but her daughters have been a little higher strung than I prefer. And so we just decided to let her retire after this year. So we're not going to save her milk because she is one that I just started treating. I guess that was just a habit. I don't need to really strip her because we're going to dump this milk anyhow. But I'm going to show you how we treat for mastitis. So if you get a little subclinical mastitis, and I'm not 100% sure that it's mastitis that she has, it doesn't look quite like mastitis. She's got a lot of clotting in there. She's not acting sick, she doesn't have a temperature, but I'm treating it with the same antibiotic to see if I can clear it up before I call the vet, because you will break the bank if you call the vet on everything. So a lot of it you do yourself. But we'll open that side up. Whoops, oh, salsa. Oh, now see, Alexa's not gonna be happy about that. You're gonna have to, I forgot that, yes, we're right out here with all the food. Let's go put you back. Do you wanna put a little more grain in there for her? Come on. I thought you were full. No, you're not coming right now. Thank you. All right, here, we'll give you a little bit more so I can keep you happy for this little treatment we're gonna do. So if I hadn't just treated her for this little infection, this milk on this side would be fine. But because I did just treat her with antibiotics, we're gonna dump this milk for a week or two. All right, now this other side, I'm not gonna milk all the way out, but we're just gonna get, so you see how it's off colored and it's got some little clotting? So I just wanna kind of open up that orifice. And then the treatment is something called Today, not to be confused with tomorrow. Today is if they have mastitis today and you wanna treat it, this is called a mammary infusion. What I do is I've just opened that orifice and I stick that little probe up in there, and then I can shoot the antibiotic right up in there. And you know, they don't love it, but it's not really that painful. It's not like I'm opening something that isn't already open. So tomorrow is a preventative of mastitis. So at the end of the milk season, if I were gonna breed her again, and I may do it with her anyhow, even though I'm not gonna breed her again, you would give them tomorrow and after their last milking of the season, and then it helps to prevent mastitis tomorrow or next year. All right.
Because they're going to be producing milk, you're not going to be milking them out, and then they're going to kind of self-regulate that and then eventually stop.
Yeah, so in terms of drying them off, and we'll let her go ahead and finish eating while I come back to Howard's question. So the gestation time is 5 months for goats. They can be in milk for the first 3 months. So we're just starting our breeding today. We're gonna see if Salsa's ready. She's maybe a little early in the being in heat, but we're gonna take her over there anyhow. So today's March 30th, that means, today's October 30th, so that means about March 30th or so, 29th, 30th, plus or minus 4 or 5 days on either side is when she would have her babies. So she's still in milk now. I could breed her now, but by January, I'd have to dry her off, okay? Because the last 2 months, there's a lot going on. She's growing baby. You don't want her to also have to be producing milk. So to dry her off, now she'll be dry long before then because I dry off about Christmas time. And the way we would dry them off is to just gradually spread out the time between the milking. Because remember, milking is supply and demand. So if I'm milking twice a day, every day, they're producing a lot. Or let's go back one further step. If she has babies nursing full time, they're producing their max. Because babies are sipping all day long and sometimes in the night. So when you go from weaning babies to milking mom, you're probably going to twice a day milking to start with. Because you're going to ease her down to just twice a day instead of all day every day, right? And then once she seems like she's producing it's regulated, the way you can tell is like that first morning after I wean them, that udder is hard and full. I mean, she can't hold any more milk in there. Milk it out, milk her that evening. When I finally come to the morning milking and it's full, but not so full that her udder's hard, then I can start thinking about dropping that evening milking or one of the milkings and go to once a day. And then So we wean at 3 months when we are, and I'm going to talk about the whole milking and bottle feeding and all that stuff in a minute. But around 3 months, babies aren't going to get milk anymore, whether I'm bottle feeding them or whether she's feeding them. And so then I'll usually milk through the fall once a day. And then about December, I'm going to start cutting back to maybe once every 36 hours. And then when that's going pretty well, once every 48 hours. And then when that's going well, at another day. And then just keep stretching it out until they're really down to maybe, a cup or two in a milking. And then you can just stop and they'll just reabsorb that milk. And it'll be fine. You don't want to go cold turkey though, because that's going to be an invitation to mastitis and a lot of discomfort for the mom. So that's how we do it. And every doe is a little different. The doe I'm going to bring out next is actually Salsa's mother. She is my shortest milker. So one of the things about Nubians is typically you have about a 6 to 9 month milking season, and then they naturally just start producing less. This doe has, I'd say, a 4 to 6 month. She produces like crazy for the first 2 or 3 months and then drops off very suddenly. And so once I go to once a day milking with her, I know we're about done. Now, for a big dairy operation, that would not be a good thing. For backyard dairy, that might be just what you wanted, right? You might not want a doe you have to milk 9 months or 12 months a year. Maybe you only want to milk for 4 months. And it's great that she's just naturally going to drop off anyhow, and it makes your job easier. So she's a great doe, and she's a beautiful producer when she is producing, but she just has a short season. Whereas like Phoebe, when she had triplets, I couldn't get her to dry off. I was milking once every 5 days and still had to milk her into February. She just wouldn't stop producing. So, they just vary. All right, so questions just about milking. I am going to come back to all the other things in a minute, but just about the whole milking process here. Yeah.
Today, tomorrow, is that something you have to have a script for? Or can you pick it up?
No, you can just pick it up at like Murdoch's. It too is geared to cattle. At this time of year, you can't find tomorrow because everybody's doing tomorrow right now. So they've been out of stock for about 2 or 3 weeks at Murdoch's. But yeah, you don't need a script for it. So, all right, let's get our last doe out, and we're going to talk about vaccinations because we're not milking her. Calypso, you want to come? Come on. Yes, it's your turn. Come on. I know you're not in the milk lineup, but you get to come today. It's your lucky day. All right, so she's going to jump up on that stand too, because the other thing that's nice about a milk stand, well, you have to get your whole body up there, darling, is that if you want to do anything else, having a milk stand is much better than tying them to a post and you have to lean over. So even if you never plan to milk your goats, I still recommend you have a milk stand because it is really nice. Okay, so what we're going to do with Calypso today is vaccination. We're going to start talking now about vaccinations. So there's one vaccination that we give routinely. There are others that are sort of optional. So the one we give routinely is called CD&T, Clostridium perfringens, and tetanus, okay? So Clostridium is I think it's a bacteria that is naturally present in all dairy goats' rumens. That's just part of that, they just have that. It doesn't cause any problem until it goes into overdrive. And it goes into overdrive usually with some kind of stressor, and often that stressor is overfeeding. So carbohydrate loading. If your goat's not on grain at all, and suddenly they get in the grain bag and eat a ton of grain, likely they're going to bloat, which is a separate problem, but they also may go into what's called Clostridium overgrowth. And that's where it starts to just go into overdrive, and then it starts releasing toxins into the goat's body. And that will usually kill the goat. So we want to avoid that, and so we can give them a vaccination to avoid it. We also do want to manage, their feed intake. But you know, the first couple years that we had goats, we paid the vet to do this, and you pretty quickly realize that is not going to be economically feasible. It cost me about 50 cents to give it myself. It cost me $50 to have the vet show up, and then $5 or $10 to give the shot. So quickly, you will figure out how to do this yourself. It's pretty easy. So I've got 2 different syringes here. I just wanted to be able to show you. One of them is called a Luralock, and it has little spirals in there so that the actual needle will twist on and stay on. I love these, but they're a little harder to find. They're a little more expensive. I buy them by the case, so they're great. The other one is the cheaper one that I pulled out of the little bag, and it just goes on like this, but then when you go to pull this off, sometimes you pull the whole needle off, and they just can fall off easier. They both are fine, but I just wanted to show you that difference. And then the CD&T shot is given subcutaneously. So there's 3 ways we can give shots: subcutaneously, intramuscularly, or intravenously. IV, IM, sub-Q. Okay? Sub-Q is probably the most common, and that just means under the skin. Okay? The nice thing about CD&T is you don't need to know the weight of your goat. It's always 2 cc or 2 ml. For babies, for adults, always that amount. So we do keep this refrigerated. That's why I had it in a bag with an ice thing. Okay, so back to our Clostridium. It's a subcutaneous. Here, I know, you like that one best. And we're just gonna shake it up and then take our needle, put it into the little rubber thing, pull back. We're gonna get down to 2. I go a little past 2 so I can pull it out and just make sure I don't have any air bubbles in there. All right? And then the typical place we give it is behind their elbow, but I go a little higher up because every now and then they will have a reaction to this shot, and they'll get a little knob there, and if it gets infected or gets too big, it really can impede their motion of their legs. So I like to go back a little bit, and I don't know if you all can see on that side, but yeah, so I do it about here, and I'm just pinching the skin. She's like, oh no, what's coming? And then I'm gonna put this down into the skin. So I'm just going down in there, boop, and then shoot it right in there, and that's all there is to it. It's pretty simple. What's that? Oh yes, this is a 20 gauge 1 inch for the adults, and I use a 22 ½ inch for the babies. So I think I have one of those here, or it's a 3/4 for the babies. All right, thank you for asking that question. He asked what gauge the needle was. Yes. So CD&T vaccine you also can get at Murdoch's or most farm stores without a prescription. It's very inexpensive, about $8 for a 25 dose vial, you know. So doing it yourself makes a lot of sense. We do it in the fall, so usually I do it in October, and then we do it again in the spring. We do our spring vaccinations for the pregnant does 3 to 4 weeks before she kids. And then that gives the babies some initial immunity. And then once their immune system kicks in at about 6 or 7 weeks, then we give them their first dose of their own, and then they get a second dose 3 or 4 weeks later. If we didn't give mom hers for some reason before the babies were born, then they recommend a 3-shot series for the newborns. But we always time it that way so that the moms have gotten theirs. All right, so questions just about CD&T and giving a vaccination. If you're giving an intramuscular shot, you can do it in the neck or back here in the rump. There is a nerve. What is that nerve back here? Do you remember what it's called? I don't know if that's one, but if you hit it, oh, they're not happy with you. It hurts. So, but not very many vaccinations or shots. Penicillin sometimes we do intramuscularly. All right. I think because you're being good. We're gonna, while she's up here, I'm gonna talk a little bit about hoof trimming. Okay, so they, even though she's being a little impatient, she's usually pretty good. And you know, we do want them to learn to just have to stand here patiently not eating, because there are times where I have to do more work than I want her to eat. So it's sometimes good practice for them to have to just be like, I know you're not hungry anymore, but you're gonna stand here for a little while. All right, so hoof trimming, Also, you want to do yourself. Don't pay a farrier or a vet to do hoof trimming. It's pretty easy. These are both for sheep. Again, goats don't have their own product line for trimming their feet. There's a number of different ones, but these are the ones I like. I have learned to always wear gloves because even my best behaved goats occasionally pull right at the moment that I'm about to cut, and then I go right into my thumb and have a really beautiful puncture wound. And I swear I've done that more times than I care to really admit, although I just did. All right, so if you want to get up to be able to see the bottom of the foot, the basic goal here is we want the bottom of the feet to run pretty parallel to the hairline. All right, now we can't really see that line too well right now. I know you're sick of standing here, but you're going to do it. Oh, it's okay. I'm just going to get some of this dirt out here. What'll happen, and these aren't terribly overgrown, I do this about every 2 months on average. Sometimes in the high growth seasons, you have to do it more often. Sometimes in low growth seasons, not as much. But what you can see here is the flat sole of her foot, and then the edges are starting to come up and curl around. And the toe will keep getting longer and longer, which messes up her angle. Pretty soon she's walking like this or walking like this. And remember, we need strong, healthy legs to carry babies and udders full of milk year after year after year. So we want these feet to be really flat and even so that she can stand correctly and not put undue stress on her ligaments. And then also bacteria can get into these folds and we can get hoof rot. So we just take the clippers and we run kind of parallel to the foot. And so you can see that now we've got pretty much that over part done. She's got just a tiny little bit of growth on the bottom here. Not much, but I just want to show you that this is kind of this gelatinous stuff that you can also cut. She doesn't have much. So there's not much to see there. Let me just get this part done. It probably would have been better to get one out that had worse feet, but I just trimmed everybody in the last couple weeks, so their feet are all pretty good. They do have a quick though, so if you're just learning to do this, you want to take small chunks off at a time because they'll really bleed when you cut it. They don't seem to mind it very much. Like my goats never react as if it hurts. They just bleed like crazy. Yeah, so really I don't need to take too much off of her. They're usually a lot worse with their back legs than the front, so I'll just kind of show you a hold that I like to do. And what I find is in training them, when they're fighting like this and pulling, don't let them have their leg. Because then you're just saying, oh, fight and pull and you get your leg back. So if they're fighting and pulling, keep holding it. And then if they're getting tired when they're being good there, let them put it down and just say, okay, it's okay. But then really get them used to being handled. So you see how much better she is that second time. She's still pulling a little bit. This is a weird situation for her to be outside. But you can see her feet are getting a little misshapen in the back from getting long. And that's the other thing we want to really avoid. So this pulling is what happens. Ideally, she would just be munching away up there and then she'd be much more preoccupied. You're gonna fall off of here in a minute, girlie. I think she has some in there and she's just not eating it. But you can try some more of the regular grain. They don't always love the alfalfa pellets. Stand there now, please. So you can see it's sometimes a moving target, which is one reason it's really good to have gloves. All right, we're probably not going to get a full trim in here. Could you please stop? Let me just get one more little trim. There we go. All right. So we'll come back and do her, but you can see here, there, you can get a good look at that gelatinous part. We still want that to be flat, but again, even it has, you can get too low and then now they're pretty tender-footed, so you want to just take it very gradually.
Is that because they're of the calcium and like, because sheep you do it like once a year. So with dairy goats, you're saying you do it every.
Yeah, we do it about every 8 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, 8 to 10 weeks, maybe 6 to 8 in the growing season. Oops, can't take this all the way off, but I'm hot. I'm gonna switch this around here for a second. Yeah, I don't know why they grow so much faster than sheep.
I want to say it's a calcium thing, but.
Could be some different mineral thing. Do you know, Vet? Why sheep are so much less?
It's keratin, it's not really, it's calcium.
I guess you're right. Yeah, it's not like fingernails, but.
Yeah. All right, so questions so far. We've talked a little bit about breeds and milking and mastitis treatment and prevention, giving shots. Oh, let's go back to vaccinations for a second. So we do give the CD&T twice a year. Rabies is optional, and I typically do not do rabies shots. For one thing, they're a lot more expensive, and we just don't have a lot of mammal-to-mammal rabies. The only time I will do them is if we have a big uptick. Like a few years ago, there were a lot of rabid raccoons and skunks in this general area, and as a prevention, we did some rabies shots, but we typically don't do them regularly. We do a blood test once a year called CAE. That stands for caprine arthritis encephalitis. And that is a disease that is primarily passed through the mother's milk, although it can be passed just through shared water buckets. And it is not curable, and it is fatal. So you want it not to be in your herd in the first place. So we test for it every year while the does are pregnant. And so it's a blood test. You have to test your entire herd, whether they're being bred or not, if they're in proximity with each other, to be able to say you genuinely have a CAE-free herd. So we test when they're pregnant because then I can run a pregnancy test at the same time. So our options for knowing whether they're bred or not are an ultrasound, which you can do around 40 days, or a blood test, which I think you can do at around 30 days. The blood test's a little more definite that they are pregnant. You won't know how many, but you don't really know how many with the ultrasound either. They have a way of hiding in little nooks and crannies. So they can say, yes, she's definitely pregnant. I definitely see 1 or 2. Prepare for 5, because you don't know how many are really going to be in there. Yeah.
If you were bringing a new goat into your herd, is there anything else you would test for besides CAE?
That's a great question. So there are 2 other diseases. Oh yeah, sorry. The question was, if you were bringing a goat into your herd, is there anything else you would test for? And the 2 other things that you would probably want to test for, depending where that goat was coming from, is CL and Johne's. The reason I say depending where you're coming from is we don't have a lot of CL and Johne's in this area. So even up at CSU, when I've suggested that we run a full panel, they're like, you really don't need to, because you just don't see a lot of that in goats that are from here. It's an expensive panel to run. So, but if you were bringing in a goat from somewhere else or you had any questions, I would probably run that full panel. But we do the CAE every year on all the goats, and we do it while they're pregnant also because if we were to have a positive, we wouldn't want those babies to then be drinking that mother's milk. So we did have 1 year where we had a false positive, and I was pretty sure it was false because I had just vaccinated her. It was Salsa, and you're not supposed to run the CAE test right after vaccinating because it can give you a false positive. But I didn't have time to run. There's a better test that can give you more conclusive information, and I didn't have time to run it before the babies were born to find out if she was indeed negative, as I suspected she was. So we had to pull her babies and bottle feed them with pasteurized milk to be sure. So because you don't want to pass that through the mother's milk. She did end up being Negative, thank goodness. So if you have a positive, your choices are to separate that animal and have it live separately from everybody else for the rest of its life, or cull it, euthanize it, which is what most people would probably do. Thankfully, we've never been faced with that, but we also do provide breeding service for outside does to our 2 bucks, and we do require a negative CAE test for them to come here to breed, so that we can keep it out of our herd, because that's your main thing, prevention, right? All right, questions about that?
We're going to talk about bucks at some point.
Yes, because we're going to go grab Salsa and see if she'd like to have a little date here. Yes.
Just a sort of general question about, like, I was wondering if you could sort of lay out like a seasonal or like a year overview of like the most important things happening on whatever time scale makes sense.
That's a great idea. She wants to know if I could do kind of a seasonal overview of the whole year at a glance. And so I'm going to hold that to right at the end, because it'll be our summary.
Yeah,
okay, so yes, so remind me at the end if I forget to do that. But in terms of seasonality, we are in breeding season now. And there is a season, at least here in this part of the country, for breeding. So the does don't cycle year-round and the bucks aren't in rut year-round. We can alter that by giving them hormone injections to have off-season breeding. But typically here in Colorado, the does will start cycling August, September. They start getting going pretty good in October on their own. They'll go into heat every 3 weeks throughout the breeding season. And then the bucks usually will start to go into rut, kind of like elk. Usually a little earlier than that. I find about July they start going into rut, and you can tell because they start peeing all over themselves, they stink, and they start getting really aggressive and just wanting to breed everything and everybody in sight. Even their weather companions they live with peacefully the rest of the year suddenly look very interesting to them. So we are in breeding season now. It'll end here in Colorado about January, early February. The bucks will go out of rut and the does will stop cycling. Now that's in general. There's always exceptions. You'll have some does that don't follow that schedule, some bucks that seem to be happy to breed anytime, anywhere. And then the Nigerian dwarf is a breed that is said to be a year-round breeder. I don't know if that's really true. I have a good friend that raises Nigerians, and she's suspicious that in this climate you really have truly in heat year-round. And you did get a breed, yes.
Yeah, I have like
yes.
week-old babies right now.
Oh, yes. So see, it can happen, and probably more likely with your breed. You keep a buck on the property too. Yeah, so we do keep 2 bucks. We keep them way over there for a number of reasons. One is, we want to choose when we breed, right? So if they're too close together, sometimes they're breeding through the fence, sometimes the buck can easily jump out and get into wherever they are. The other thing is the boys are pretty stinky. And if they're around the does and milk, their milk gets pretty stinky. It's just a strong odor that will actually get into your milk supply. So we have the boy barn over there, and we're pretty sure, so I try to start tracking their heat cycles, and I plan out my schedule around my schedule. So I'm going to be gone until the first week of March. So no babies were allowed those first few breed heat cycles. No, we're not going to be here. So I knew she was due to go in heat because it's about every 3 weeks. Today is, I think, day 21. So she's right on schedule, I think. She's being pretty quiet. Usually we can tell they're in heat by a number of things. One is they get more vocal. So she did talk to me this morning when I came out, and she's usually pretty quiet. They'll also start looking in the direction of the bucks because they can smell them, and they'll start flagging their tail, and they'll start getting a little bit of vaginal discharge. So you combine all those things. Now there's some other things behaviorally too, like they might just be acting particularly nasty to the other does, and that might be a sign too. Or if you keep wethers, that's the castrated male, in with your herd, the wethers are suddenly mounting this doe that they don't normally do that. And the wether's telling you she's probably in heat. So we're going to give Salsa a chance to tell us whether she really wants to come and do this, and we'll just take her right over there today. Nope, you all stay now. All right, so are you ready to be on? on the move? All right, no, we're going this way, girly. So this would be early in the heat cycle, and she may not be ready yet. Usually the does in that, so they go into heat every 3 weeks. They might be in heat for 12 hours or for 3 or 4 days. Okay, it really depends on the doe. And within that time frame, there's a shorter window where they're in what's called standing heat. And it's just what it sounds like. They'll stand for the buck. So too early, they think that buck is disgusting. Too late, the buck is now disgusting again. Right in the middle, ooh, you are so handsome. All right, so we're gonna see if she thinks he's handsome today. So we'll just bring her over here. Sometimes the does will literally be standing in this far corner of their paddock telling me I am so ready. She's not doing that yet, but I also know this doe pretty well. She's not very dramatic when she's in heat, where some of the other does are much more obvious. So, and then sometimes just smelling the buck will get them going. Now watch your step here. We are doing a little electrical, we're adding some electricity to the barn, so there's still a hole over there, and just watch here. So we'll just take her over here and see what her reaction is. This is her date right here. And I'll let you all stay out there so you don't get peed on. So I'm gonna just let her stand by him for a little bit and see if she has any interest in him. Oh, there goes the tail. So that's a good sign. So you saw the tail flagging. She's like, hello. But she's also not 100% sure she's ready yet. So this is Snickers. He is a wether. These 3 are our wethers. He's the first baby born on our farm. So he is actually a mini Nubian, and he's now, what, 12 or 13? The little guy back there is the oldest one because he was a companion to our original doe. He's got a little arthritis now. These 2 are Nigerian dwarfs, but wethers. This guy's very big for a Nigerian. All right, we're gonna put her in there and see what we think. I know you are ready, we're just not sure if she is. So the other buck over there is her father, so that's why this is the chosen one. So the other one is Triton, our spotted buck. This boy also throws spots, and we want spots in our herd just because we like them. Our original doe was spotted. So we'll see if...
If you were to produce a doe and you wanted to keep her, who would you breed her?
What would I what?
How would you breed her? Who would you breed her to?
Yeah, so this one is not related to her at all. So that's why he's the chosen one, because that's her father. And so for me, because I only have 2 bucks, that's who I'm choosing. Also, his mother is a 3-time champion and has an udder that's a little bit closer to what I want. I love her udder, but I'm going to try to improve the next generation. His dam's udder has slightly smaller teats, and I feel like hers are a little too big. So it's a way for me to improve on this generation. There we go. So you can see she's cooperating very nicely, and there he did it. So did you see him kind of thrust back? That's really how you can tell that he got it. And you can see she's kind of dripping some semen there. I usually let them breed 2 or 3 times, but just within a few minutes. This is really early in her heat cycle, right? I said this morning she started talking to me. This is day 21. Yesterday she was not showing really many signs. I wanted to get her in this morning because I'll have better chance of getting girl babies, because the boy sperms swim faster, but the girl sperms live longer. And so by getting her in early in her heat cycle, by the time she releases that egg, it's the girl sperms that are most likely to still be alive. And so this is called hand breeding, where we're selecting the time, we're bringing them in here. I call it wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. We get them home, okay? You're not gonna stay here all weekend with them, because then we're probably gonna get more boys. And we used to pen breed, which is where we would leave them through their whole heat cycle with the buck. We always got more boys. And since we started hand breeding, only 1 year did we get slightly more boys than girls. Yeah. So isn't that great? I see him, even our veterinarian's like, mind blown, right? It's kind of awesome. So yeah.
So
Yes.
I have lots of questions.
Okay.
So if you don't have bucks and you're taking your doe to a buck, then you run the risk of having more boys, is what I hear you saying, because maybe they're not going to hand breed.
Yeah, so what she said is if you don't have a buck and then you have to take your doe to a buck for breeding, you run the risk of getting more boys. And I would say that is true, because by the time it's really obvious that they're in heat and you call that person and say, I'm ready to come and it fits my schedule tomorrow morning, you are probably going to get them bred, but you are probably running the risk of having more boys. Now, is that always a bad thing? Not necessarily. Depends what your goals are here, because we're going to come back to talking about meat goats in a minute. But if you're just raising dairy goats, the girls rule. I mean, face it, we want a lot of girls, right? So yeah, that could be an issue. So you have some options. If you don't have your own buck, one thing you can do is try to find a breeder that will board. So I used to do that. I'm not currently, but what that would mean is you bring your doe on day 18 of her cycle so that she's here right next to the buck, and the breeder says, today's the day, you're good, you're good. Or you give them the hormone shots, you induce heat so that you know exactly when they're going to be in heat so you can get them there on time. Or you can do artificial insemination. So you have to find somebody that knows how to do it. I do have a friend, in fact, that buck is the result of an artificial insemination. We wanted to get spots back in the herd. We had a very black and white herd for a while, and so we AI'd his dam with semen from a buck known to throw spots, and that had the other qualities I was looking for. So if, you know, there too, you can time it a little bit better, but, you know, it still can be tricky, which is one reason I have my own bucks now. I did the drive-by breeding for a lot of years. First of all, it's a lot of driving. You know, if you have a lot of does, you're constantly driving to bucks. And then I found that it's just so much easier for me to be able to hit that sweet spot with them right here. And then I can also catch the does in heat easier because there are more visual cues when they can smell the bucks on the property. Yeah. So if she was not ready right now, she would just be running from him and she would be repulsed by him or beating him up. Sometimes the does will get pretty nasty to the bucks, but you can see that they're having a nice little love chat right now, and he's wooing her a little and getting himself revved up for round 2. And so I'll let him go at least twice and then we'll bring her back. This is my first year breeding with him, and he's a pretty young buck. It's his second season. But I didn't know how quick he would be. So usually though, I find it's 10 or 15 minutes between, and then he's ready to go again. And then we'll take her home and then we'll mark that in our calendar. Now, how do we know if she's pregnant or not? It's called, how will we know she's settled? That will mean she got pregnant. Well, I will watch her like a hawk in 3 weeks, right? And if she doesn't go back into heat in 3 weeks, I'm pretty sure she's bred. Okay, but then I will also run a preg test on her. Usually I'll do that about January. I'll run all my CAEs because everybody that I'm going to breed will be bred, and we'll confirm it. But usually with the younger does that cycle pretty regularly, you can just tell because they didn't go back into heat. Sometimes though, they'll go back into heat, but they really were bred. So if that happens, so if she goes back into heat in 3 weeks, I'll bring her back over here and I'll breed her again. And then in my March calendar and April calendar, I have 2 potential due dates. This is due date number 1 and this is due date number 2. If she doesn't have them that first one, I can guess that it was the second one. But live cover breeding, which is what this is fairly reliable in young does. As they get older, just like older women, you know, human women, they're less reliable. She's only going into her 3rd year. She's always gotten pregnant the first time, and she's young and healthy. So if she doesn't go into heat in 3 weeks, we can be pretty sure. Yes?
Can I ask a follow-up question to the age issue? If you've got an older doe, is it best to hand breed them like this, or AI? Is there a difference between success rates?
So with AI, your best success rate is not to do first fresheners. So they don't have very good success their first year of going into heat. And then As they get older, all the methods are going to be lower success rate. I don't honestly know if one is better than the other when they get older. But the other thing with older does, remember the dairy goat has been bred for many, many years to be bred, right? They are a dairy animal. They're supposed to have babies every year. They actually do better if they're bred every year. And as they get older, it gets harder for them. Hold on, see if we get, oops, yeah, you weren't in there when you did that, dude. Let's see if you didn't really do it. Sorry, got a little distracted there.
No, it's really fascinating.
I know, isn't that nice of her to be right on schedule for you all? I was hoping she would be. At any rate, as they get older, you know, they may, having babies every year. If my does are over about 6 or 7, they can miss 1 year and I'll breed them the next year. But if they've missed 2 years, I'm gonna call them retired. Because in an older doe, having 2 years off, that 3rd year, if they get pregnant again, is probably gonna be a pretty hard delivery. Everything has kind of seized up and tightened up and they're gonna have a harder delivery. Now, if I had a doe I really wanted to breed or accidentally bred and that was the case, I might do a planned cesarean on that doe or at least take her up to CSU so that if she did run into trouble, she'd be right there and they could take care of her. But remember, I'm not trying to be a profitable dairy. I am a pet dairy, right? I'm trying to make sure that my animals have the best, happiest, healthiest, most comfortable lives they can have. So if it costs me a little more to do that, like I'm okay with that. If you're in this to really try to make a profit, you know, then you're breeding those does every year until they just aren't doing it anymore because you need to get your money out. And I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with that either way. It's just in my case, some of what I do is influenced by the fact that these are half pet and half product.
In terms of finding a buck, if you don't want to have one, how do you kind of get plugged in the goat world?
Yeah, so he asked if you don't have a buck and you want to find one, how do you get plugged in? So one of the best ways is to go to your professional breeder association like American Dairy Goat Association or the Nigerian Dwarf Association or the Miniature Dairy Goat Association and find out from their members directory where the breeders in your area are. Also 4-H is a really good resource because most 4-H leaders will be happy to plug you in. I am a 4-H leader now. I'm actually a superintendent for the fair as well in the goat program. So because I also show with the Colorado Dairy Goat Association, I pretty much know people who have bucks of just about every breed. So I do know a very good Nigerian breeder right here in Longmont if you don't want to keep your own bucks. And yeah, exactly. And not everybody that keeps bucks wants to breed other people's, you know, does. So it is nice when you can find them. Yes.
I don't know exactly how to say this question right, but so if you bred this doe and she produces a doe, are you going to breed her back to her grandfather?
I could. So that's getting into what we might call line breeding, and you could do that. And I'm generally pretty comfortable with not to her father. So that doe I wouldn't breed father to daughter. So that her daughter will be bred to him, and that's grandfather. I'm okay with that. Line breeding is where so he is from the same line as her, but they're distant enough that it's okay. But I loved that line, so I've actually been line breeding. But inbreeding is where you're just getting too close generationally. So I don't do full siblings, and I don't do fathers to daughters or mothers to sons. But anything spread out a little further than that, you can do once, and then you probably want to go a little further away for the next generation.
Okay, so then would you bring in another buck?
Yeah, so that's why this buck is new. So we rotate bucks in and out about every 2 to 3 years. So Triton, because he was from my best doe who I lost this past year, and he was an AI, he's staying, and he throws beautiful babies. But we'll keep rotating this spot. And then occasionally, I want something totally new, but I don't want a new buck. So I have a friend in town with Nubian bucks that I'll take does to. He's right in hygiene, which is nice and close. All right, can we just get one more here so we can be done?
I have a question.
Yes.
So with Nubians, typically, how many kids will they have?
Yeah, so the question was with Nubians, how many kids do they typically have? And I'd say with all of the full-size breeds, which Nubians are, twins is definitely most common. So twins, you will probably get 75% of your babies will be twins. Singles happen too. Triplets are not uncommon. We had 3 sets of triplets in the first 10 days of breeding of kidding season last year. That was a little unusual for us to have that many. But Nubians could have quads, quints, even 6. That's pretty unusual. Whereas the Nigerian dwarfs often have more than 2 or 3 or 4. The most we had with Nigerians when we were breeding was quads. We had 4. We had triplets a lot. What have you had, Howard? Have you had?
We have a lot of triplets.
Yeah.
And some singles.
Yeah, so once we're done with her, I'm going to talk a little bit about the whole feeding the babies thing, because when you have multiples, that can be a problem, right? They only have 2 teats. You have 3, 4 babies. Can they feed them all, or are you going to have to help? And it does depend a little bit. All right, can we get the show on the road here, mister, so I can take her back? Because we want girls. We don't want you to stay here all day. Okay, so the question was, what do you do with your bucklings? That is such a good question. So boys are a little harder to place than girls, right? So you have some options. If you have a really good purebred show line, you may be able to find some homes for those bucklings, as bucklings for breeding. But that's few and far between. You're not going to find a lot of buckling homes. You can castrate them, and then they're wethers. They make great pet goats, great companion goats. They make great utility goats. What is a utility goat? Well, in the 4-H world, it's a little bit of a made-up division in order to have a home for all the boys. And so that's the division I'm the superintendent for. And what the utility goat division is at the fair, where while we hike with these goats, we teach them to do obstacle courses, pull carts. They can still teach the kids all about responsibility and taking care of animals and so on, but now they have a place they can show them. You could also sell the boys for weed eating. So some of you might know Keith and the guys at Microcarbon Farm. They have 2 of our wethers and 5 other wethers from friends of mine that we started a weed eating program for them. So they're good at eating weeds. I often do a buy one, get one free for the 4-H kids. So if they buy a dairy doe, I'll sell her brother as a companion for free. And now you have 2 projects in 4-H for the price of one. You can do the dairy project and you can do the utility project. But you could also sell them for meat. So although these are not being bred for their meat ability, right? Their ability to have, they're pretty fine. You know, they're not going to have a ton of meat on them, whereas the meat breeds are much meatier, right? They can be eaten, and there is a market for those. So a lot of breeders do sell the boys as just meat goats.
Is there a certain age under which you need to process them for meat?
You know, usually I would say under 2 years. I have known of some people that would take them older than that, but then it gets a little bit like, right, lamb versus mutton. You know, it gets a little tougher and gamier. But some people will take them even when they're a little older. The Nigerian dwarfs are probably the easiest ones to place the boys because they're little and they're cute and they're often pet goats. Also, I think it's probably pretty obvious to all of you, but I get asked this question a lot, so I just want to clarify it, that even if you have a doe, it doesn't mean you have to milk her, right? Because she's not going to have milk unless you breed her. So you can have a doe and never breed her and just have a pet doe. The thing is that she's going to cost you more than the wether, you know? So like we might sell our doelings for $300, $350, and we sell the wethers for $50 or $75. So if you just want a pet goat, you know, it is better to just get a little unwanted wether or excess wether. All right, are you getting sick of him now? Are we almost done? I haven't been watching her. Has he gotten a second time on? Yeah.
Can Nubians get horns?
Oh, Oh, thank you for asking that. I haven't talked that. She asked if the Nubians get horns. Yes, all breeds, male and female, get horns, unless they're naturally polled. So the horns we don't want in the dairy goat world, right? We've got collars and fences and stanchions and udders full of milk. From a management perspective, horns are really dangerous in the dairy world. Now, some people don't like what I'm about to say that we do, and so they go ahead and allow them to have horns. There's some instances where horns might not be bad. But as a matter of course, we disbud all of our babies at about 5 days old. So before that horn erupts, it's just a little bunch of cells. And you cauterize it with a cauterizing gun. You burn out that horn cell, and then they won't grow a horn. Now, the babies don't love that, but what they hate the most is the restraint. They don't like being held down for it. They start screaming the minute you restrain them. The burning out of the horn cell is pretty gnarly, and it's not the most pleasant thing, but it's over in 2 minutes, and then they're right back up and eating and drinking and playing like it never happened. Did he get her? Okay. If he's still trying, he might not have, but we'll give him a sec. So we disbud all babies because a broken horn is extremely painful. Also, horns in collars can twist and strangle the goat that has the collar on it. Horns in fences, the goat can get stuck and you're gone all day and the goat's in the hot sun and it dehydrates because it can't get to water. I've seen goats jump up and flip over and fall on their back with the horn and break their neck. There's so many things that can happen with horns. The reason you might keep horns, though, is they are defense to predators. So if you have a big property and you're going to let them just be out, even with a llama, you might want them to have a little more defense than that llama or the dog. So then horns might make sense. You usually don't, though, want to keep horned goats with disbudded goats because one has a defense and one doesn't, right? And that's not really fair. People do it, and there are exceptions. Now, I did mention there is something called naturally polled, and that's a gene where they won't get a horn at all. They're naturally polled, but we don't select on that gene because a naturally polled doe and a naturally polled buck will usually produce sterile offspring. So it's great if one side has it, and then you get about 25% of those babies are naturally polled, which is great. You don't have to disbud one of the babies this year. But it's not something you're going to really select on over time. All right. Oh, he's peeing all over you, darling. Okay, did he get her that time, do you think? All right, we're just going to take her back now anyhow. Come on, you're done. Come, please. She's like, no, I don't want to leave. Please. I'll bring her back if I feel like she needs to, but I think I'm going to call her good because I know he got her that one time. No, you're going to stay here. And now these boys are all going to be very interested. Did you see Thistle here was mounting the other boy? They have little memories somewhere in there of what that was before they... All right. So if I would have waited till this afternoon, probably she'd be a little bit more primed, but I also just don't know how long that buck takes to get the job done because he's new for me. All right, so first one of the season. All right, how are we doing on time? Oh my gosh. All right, so we have one more thing to talk about and then we'll try to wrap things up unless you have questions, and that is feeding babies once they arrive, okay? So the natural way to feed them is just let them nurse, right? And that's easier in a lot of ways because then you don't have to milk the mom and you don't have to feed the babies. But you also don't get any milk for a while. And those babies might eventually be a little on the wild side, okay? So we call that being dam raised. So it's easy, but it has a cost. Just put her in here. All right, so that's one choice, is to dam raise your babies. The other extreme is to 100% bottle raise the babies. Pull them from mom, milk mom, put that milk into a baby bottle, feed babies her milk. Why would you want to do that? Well, you're going to get really friendly babies because now the babies think you're mom. You'll also know for sure how much milk they're getting because you see it in the bottle and you see it in their belly. And then you can control how that mom's udder is being milked. So a lot of times babies choose a favorite side, and then that side produces more than the other side, and you get a lopsided udder. Okay, so there's pros and cons. You might, though, think you're going to make one of those choices for yourself. I'm definitely going to dam raise, or I'm definitely going to bottle raise, and then they make the choice for you. So what I mean by that is you might have a baby that comes out and it's a little weak kid that can't nurse. So Salsa, that doe that we just had, was that kid. She came out, we didn't think she was going to live the first day. She was just flat as a pancake. She was out a little bit early and she just had no suck response at all. She has to get colostrum in the first few hours. That's that first milk. And so we had to feed her with a little medicine dropper for about 6 hours. My rule of thumb is 6 ounces in 6 hours for the full-size breed. So I stayed up with her till about midnight, made sure she got that first 6 ounces. And then in the middle of the night, she was strong enough to take a bottle, but she lived in my living room for about 3 days until she was strong enough to come out here. She was never going to nurse. You know, she lost that instinct at that point. So now I've got a bottle baby whether I wanted it or not, and I'm committed, okay? Sometimes it's because the mom has a problem. So these babies, their mom died at 5 days after they were born. It was quite tragic. She had a very hard delivery with them. She was on all kinds of meds and we just couldn't, she just stopped eating and she shut down. So guess what? I gotta bottle feed them. There is no mom, right? So then you're stuck bottle feeding. We tend to do a combination of these two. I really like to leave my babies on their moms for the first few weeks. I just think it's more natural. I think it's easier. I think it's a healthier start for the babies. That's my ideal world. So I try to get the babies up and get them nursing and make sure everything's hunky-dory. But then at some point between 2 weeks and 3 months when they're weaned, I'm probably going to pull them from moms for some period of time, whether it's just for the afternoon a few days a week or whether it's all night, and I'm going to try to get them to take a bottle. Because if I leave them 100% dam raised, especially Nubians, they're just going to be wilder and they're going to be harder to handle, harder to catch. And so I like to bottle feed them a period of that time. But if I bottle feed them all the time, they're almost too friendly. Like these babies, I can hardly walk in that pen and they're just tripping all over me, just wanting to, you know, they're so happy to see me, I guess. All right, so just let me show you a couple things. Sorry, I'm moving on you. But if you are going to bottle feed, you have a couple of options. When they're first born, Pritchard nipple. This little nipple fits in a newborn's mouth real nicely, okay? You can put it on a pop bottle or you can put it on an actual bottle that was for bottle feeding. You put it on a beer bottle, okay? So you're gonna give them just a few ounces many times a day for the first day or two. They have tiny little tummies. Eventually we're gonna get them to 4 times a day bottle feeding for about 2 or 3 weeks. And usually they're only gonna take about half a bottle at the beginning, maybe even only a third of the bottle. Then we're gonna get them down to 3 times a day and then twice a day and then eventually once a day as we're getting ready to wean them. So it's a pretty big time commitment, and if you're doing it with a bottle, you know, you can set up little racks and feed multiple babies, or you have to do them 1 at a time or 2 at a time, you know, they'll learn. Or you can transition them to something called a lamb bar. Again, why is it not a goat bar? I don't know. It's called a lamb bar. And this is basically a bucket with tubes and little nipples on the edge. But you'll see these are these big fat nipples. And so you want to transition your kids from the bottle to the big fat nipple, which takes them a little while to get used to, and then to the lamb bar. These little things I really recommend if you build your own lamb bar. What they do is they're little stoppers so that once the milk gets up into the tube, it stays in there and they don't have to keep pulling it all through and it going back out again. At any rate, if you're feeding a lot of babies, the bucket's really nice. You just milk all the does, throw all the milk in the bucket, put it in the pen, and everybody gets on a nipple. You can see you can have lots of them. So if I'm doing more than 2 or 3 kids at a time on bottle, I like to get them on the lamb bar. It's just a lot quicker. All right, so questions about that? I know I kind of jumped through that quickly.
When you do have a lamb that you have to bottle raise, and then you bred that ewe, have you noticed that in her, have you noticed like a sort of weakness in her kids at all, or have they done fine?
So he asked if when you have had to bottle feed a baby, does that baby then as an adult seem to be a little bit weaker? Was that the question? No.
Once that adult, once that ewe then has her babies, do you notice that like trait of not being able to
Oh, the bad mother temperament? Is that kind of what you mean? Like, does she then not?
create bottlenecks?
Right. So he's talking in lamb language, right? Ewes is sheep, and we're talking in goat language, does. And I think in sheep that is a big issue, and in goats not so much. And what I mean by that is, if I pull bottle babies, usually I'm doing it by choice, or it's because the baby was weak, not because the mother didn't have mothering instincts. But some mothers are better mothers than others. But I have found that first fresheners often are the ones that aren't quite sure how to be a mother, and then the next year they go on to being great mothers. So I would never rule out like the mothering instinct until after the second time. And even then, I actually just read, I didn't do in my introduction, but I write for Goat Journal, and I have some copies here if you all want to take any of these with you. But the next issue will have an article by me on that very topic about good mother, bad mother. And in doing that research for the article, we found that really it's not a given that once a bad mother, always a bad mother. But you will see different mothering traits showing up year on year. So Calypso, for instance, is not a very maternal mother. She's fine, but if the baby has the slightest thing wrong with it, she's going to reject it. So if she thinks it's slightly deformed, like its legs didn't kind of unfurl right away, okay, that one's done. Whereas Alexa, won't let her babies out of her sight and she'll let babies nurse for a year and a half if I let them. So there are different tendencies, but they all do their job. They just, some do it better than others. All right. Was there another question in there about just the mothering? The question I thought you had asked was the bottle baby. Does it have any weakness? I will definitely say dam-raised kids grow better. They just grow faster. They get bigger overall. And the bottle babies do tend to be a little bit on the smaller side, at least to start with. But as long as you're making sure they're getting enough, they're generally healthy enough. All right, I'm going to come back to that final question of the whole year in a review to kind of wrap things up. And then I am happy. Oh, that's Howard had a quick question.
You haven't talked about worming
Oh, yes, thank you. Worming. So when I first started goats, we were told to worm twice a year and to rotate the wormer. So we used Strongid in the fall and we used ivermectin in the spring. Then probably about 6 or 7 years ago, we started to be told only worm when you see symptoms. Okay, because there's so much resistance now to the wormers we have. We haven't had a new wormer since ivermectin came on how many years ago? And most of the time they say 80% of your parasites are going to show up in 20% of your herd. And so you're going to look for signs of worms before you just blanket worm. Signs will be a lack of thriftiness. They're not holding weight. They just look ruddy, right? Their coat isn't shiny and glossy. Their eyes aren't bright and happy. Maybe they even have some diarrhea or something going on. But then before you just throw any old wormer at them, you want to do a fecal test and know what you've got so that you're treating them with the right thing. Okay, so that's more how we do for the adults. For the kids, there's some different things. Coccidia, which is different than Clostridium. They sound very similar. Clostridium is what we vaccinated for. Coccidia is a parasite, and kids are very susceptible to it, and it can kill them pretty quickly. But again, coccidia is everywhere. And so, again, some breeders will just treat for all newborns when they come out. Everybody's going to get this coccidia prevention. I typically only do it when I see symptoms. And again, the symptoms would be diarrhea or some lack of thriftiness. They're not gaining weight. And then if I'm going to treat one, I'm going to treat all the babies. So I don't do it as a matter of course. But that's how we do it. Again, there are lots of other ways. There are herbal wormers that are really good as preventatives, not necessarily so good at a big parasite load. I've just found those to be tricky because they're usually a daily or weekly, and then you have to make sure everybody's getting the right amount. Yeah, and they're expensive. Yeah, so we've tried that, and we've just found we do better with waiting until we see some kind of a symptom and then treating specifically for what it is with one of the medications. All right. Okay, are we ready for the year-round summary? Okay. So you got your first goat, it's a baby, and you're like, someday I would like to have milk and make cheese. All right, first of all, that baby has to be big enough to have babies. So the general rule of thumb is it should be at least 8 months old and at least 70% of its total body weight before it's bred. So if those babies are born in May, you're probably not going to breed it the first breeding cycle. It's not going to be 8 months old yet within your next breeding season. So you're going to carry that baby for a whole year and then breed it, okay, typically. If you have a February baby, you might be able to breed it late in the breeding cycle that year if it's developing nicely, okay? Or you might not breed it at all ever, and then you won't have milk. I would say you want to get that doe bred by 3, maybe 4 at the latest. It gets harder on them to wait too long to breed them, and your chances of them getting bred get lower. Okay, so that's the first thing with your does. Then once they're bred, you've got, and then as far as what's happening with those babies, when the baby was born, hopefully the mother had her vaccination and that baby got its booster shots at 6 and 9 weeks. And then you're going to give it another booster that following fall, okay? And then you're waiting a year, you're breeding it. Now you bred the doe, let's say in October, you're expecting babies in March. So baby's going to come 5 months later. And you're going to have those babies. Those babies are going to drink most of the milk for 3 months. And then you finally get milk. And so you might not get your milk until June, that it's now your turn. And then you might have that milk till December. So you might be looking at 6 months of milk that you get at all. If you're milking twice a day and you have a full-size breed, you might get somewhere around 1 gallon a day of milk. So 1 goat is usually plenty for somebody's own family, right? But you can't have 1 goat because they're a herd animal, so you have to have 2. You have to have a companion. All right, so that's kind of the year in review. In terms of the other tests you would do, is probably about January or so, or February. You're probably going to want to run your blood tests for CAE if you're doing that. If you have a closed herd, meaning you bought from a closed herd that was CAE free and you've never taken your goats anywhere and you've never brought any goats in, you don't need to do that test every year, okay? Because your goats aren't being exposed to it. You have a closed herd. But if you're going to shows or you're bringing other goats in, then you're going to want to run that CAE test, and maybe you're wanting to run a preg test. All right. Did that cover all of the things more or less?
So when do they dry off?
Oh, yes.
Right now, right?
Yeah, so when do they dry off? It kind of depends on when do you want them to dry off. And it also depends on the individual goat. So Calypso dried herself off, right? She just started producing so much less. The others will keep going until I decide they're done. I mean, if I were going in January, February, they're just going to be producing so much less. Also, there is this phenomenon called late season goat milk. And what that is about November. I find it's about the time change that it happens. November, December milk just starts getting wonky. That's the only way I can describe it. It gets wonky. It starts getting a little smelly, it gets thicker, it gets higher in butter fat. It's harder to make cheese out of. And that's when I'm usually ready to be done, because cheese making is my main thing. But not all does will get wonky in November, December. Last year, Phoebe went into January, February, and her milk was still lovely. But when you decide you're ready, then you're going to start spreading it out. So most of the time it is around, that shorter days. November, December is a typical time to be drying off, but it's also going to depend on when you bred. If you're having kids in January, you are having to dry off at least by now, right, with that doe, because only the last 2 months they have to be dry. All right.
2 months of gestation, they have to be dry.
Right,
Okay,
right. Yep, last 2 months they should be dry because it's just too much taxation on their body. All right, whew, that was a lot to cover. I think we covered pretty much everything except a little bit about milk. And so I'm happy to take you up to the cheese room and have you taste a little bit of milk. I have some cheese for you to taste, and I have a little parting gift for you. Because what do you do with all that milk? Well, you can drink it. You can make cheese out of it. You can make goat milk soap. So I have soap for you today to take with you. You can make goat milk caramels. I made caramels last night for you to taste. You can make goat milk fudge and goat milk ice cream and goat milk yogurt. But at a certain point, you know, you're done with milk.
What's the weirdest thing you've done with your goat milk?
Well, I haven't done this, but I want to do it, and that is goat milk paint. Yes, there is a very niche-y paint maker in New England that makes goat milk based paint. And I am hell-bent to do that one of these days. It's supposed to be really great paint and really non-toxic and use it in baby rooms and everything. So I want to try that.
That's so cool. Do you do a class on the soap or lotions?
I do. So the question was, do I do a class on the soaps or lotions? So we do have a cheese making school. That's most of what our classes are, but we do get a lot of requests for the soaps and lotions. I don't know if we're going to do an in-person class on that this year or not, because we are kind of limited how much in-person we're doing. We are doing them. But during the whole pandemic year, we developed about 50 courses online and recorded them, and they're now on our website as on-demand classes, and it covers every cheese you can think of. And we do have a goat milk soap class in there, and we also have the caramels and some other desserts you can do with goat milk. So those are for sure there, and then we may or may not do an in-person one again. Yes?
What would you say the time commitment per day is to have?
Oh, good question. He asked, yeah, what was the time commitment per day? Yeah, for a goat or two, right? So I will answer that by saying when everything's going good, it's really minimal. Meaning everybody's healthy, everybody's happy, moms are feeding babies, you know. So, and it does vary at different times of the years. Right now, at this time of year, I'm literally coming out in the morning, we feed them first thing in the morning. That takes all of 5 minutes. We're just throwing hay to everybody, make sure they have water. Then I come back out an hour or two later, I milk everybody. Well, I'm only milking 2.5 goats. That takes me 15 minutes. Okay, if you have good, quick, easy milkers and you're good at it, that's pretty fast. Then I come back out and let them out. So my does go out to the back pasture. I actually let them out after I finish milking. And the babies stay in because she's not allowed to go out for 8 weeks. And I'm going to maybe keep an eye on them a little bit, like every now and then, check on them to make sure nobody got stuck in a fence. But for the most part, they're on their own all day. And then at about 5 o'clock, the whole feeding thing happens again, another few minutes. And then at the end of the night, we just make sure everybody's either closed in. Oh, we didn't talk about fencing, and I'm sorry we're running out of time. So I will be happy just to answer any fencing questions. But I'll show you 2 things just real quick. This is the best gate, gold standard gate. This is what you want. It's one-handed, goes either way. And let me tell you, there's so many times this gate's great. This is the fastest, quickest, cheapest. This goat will make you cuss so much. It's just a pain in the butt. They break it. You're in need a quick fix. I'm replacing all of these eventually. This is the gold standard for pen fencing. It's very expensive. Where do you get it? Murdoch's. I get everything in Murdoch's. Murdoch's, Jack's, Tractor Supply, all those places will have them. This is I think called livestock panel. It is the small squares and it's tall, so goats can't jump out of it and predators can't jump in, at least not very easily. It's very expensive, but it is my favorite. Goats don't get their head stuck, babies can't escape, it's rigid, so you can put up a fence in a few minutes with T-posts. It's great. There are lots of other fencing you could use. Electric fencing, much harder with goats than sheep. Electric netting, just a horrible nightmare with goats in my experience. They get stuck in it, then they're electrocuting themselves, and then you have to go turn off all the power. Hated electric netting. But field fence works fine too. But what they won't stay in is something like that. That white fencing, no goats staying in that. They're all out. Yeah, so horse fencing and goat fencing, not the same. All right. Yes?
Just really quick, wondering, you've been doing this for, you said 13, 14 years?
Yeah.
How long did it take until you were like, okay, I think I have all my pieces?
Well, I would say she asked how long from when I started doing goats did I feel like I knew what I was doing. I would say, you know, within about 2 or 3 years, I felt like I could start telling other people some of it. But every single year, I get thrown some new curveball that I'm like, oh my gosh, never seen this before, you know. So having a goat mentor is hugely important, you know. I have several people I can call. If you're always just calling your vet, you're going to run up some pretty big bills. But you do want to be friends with your vet. Know your vet before you need your vet. So I have very good relationship with my vets, and I can call for questions. But I also have 2 or 3 more experienced goat people right in my community that I'll call. And I like to be that person for you all. And people who buy my goats get me too, because I want to make sure my goats are going to good homes. So I am always on call for anyone that buys babies from me. I'll go out, I go up and give vaccinations the first year and teach people how to do it if you're in the area. So getting somebody to help you is a good idea. But when things are good, that's about what it looks like. When things aren't good, you can be spending a lot of hours out here treating wounds, you know, in the kidding stall. I will say I like to be at the kiddings. So this year I finally got a really good quality kidding cam. And boy, is that great, because you don't have to get up in the middle of the night to check to see if she's in labor. You just look at your phone and say, nope, she's fine. All right, we better wrap it up because we're about out of time. I am happy to keep hanging around informally to ask questions, but I know we're about done here, and I do have some cheese samples for you if you want them. All right, thank you all so much.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, you're amazing.
Oh, thank you.